85% of the global GDP. It comprises of about 78% of the global trade, two-thirds of the population, and almost about 95% of the patents and innovation are done in G20 countries. It's important because the United Nations is too large a body. It's not able to find solutions in today's complex world. G7 is too elitist. And it's too elitist because when several crises arose, like the Asian currency crisis, the Mexican peso crisis, the Russian financial crisis, the G7 realized that it's important to expand and cover the G20, and it was the initiative of the US president that G20 was then developed. So G20 is one body which is comprising of both advanced and emerging markets, and they are able to find very critical solutions to issues of economic growth, financial progress, social inclusion, many of these issues. The challenges are enormous. The challenges are enormous because by the time India takes over presidency, you will see that growth would have slowed down. There would be recession in several parts of the world. Global supply chains are disrupted. You have the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Climate action is very critical. And you have a scenario where growth with climate action and growth with equity, because SDGs, COVID has taken education, health, nutrition, all of them have regressed, they've not progressed. So the 2030 agenda of sustainable development goals, the world is way behind. You have to accelerate progress. So all these are challenges. And to the third point which you said, that unlike G20s held in many other parts of the world, the Prime Minister is determined to make it into an event where the citizens of India are active participants, and therefore he's decided that G20 events would be held in every single state, every single union territory of India. And that would mean that the citizens of India and the states of India, the union territories of India, would be very active participants in both substantive issues as well as issues relating to participating in cultural fairs and in participating in handicrafts, exhibitions, many other ways where they would be very big stakeholders in this process.
Excellent. It would also give Arnab and his colleagues in the media some reprieve. For the last 8 months, we've been discussing G23. Now we'll at least focus on G20. But I want to come to the demystification part of it, and when you talk about events for the public and for the people. It's very important, and I have to say this as an outsider, I hate all political parties. What has happened in the last 8 years are three things. A, there's a pride about being Indian without the arrogance. And the pride is substantiated by data points that you mentioned, data points that Mohan mentioned earlier. And you can see visible progress. It's a government that works hard. The second, which is a reality, is that the government has great individual communicators, but somehow the overarching communication of the government is poor, it's weak. The international outreach is weak. There's criticism, misplaced, not misplaced, but I think that needs some work. The third, which you very rightly mentioned, I genuinely believe that G20 is a great branding exercise for India, Indians, and Indianness. What are your views on that?
So Suhel, this is a unique opportunity. Firstly, it's a unique opportunity for every single visitor who comes to India to go back spiritually invigorated, mentally rejuvenated, and physically elevated as an Indian. He must go back being an Indian. That's important. The second important point is that it's also important to build the India narrative. A lot has been done in the last 7-8 years. And it's important to point out to the world that We've created digital public goods of the kind, building up individual identity, fast payments, consent-based empowerment on digital data, CoWIN, FASTags, the kind of digital public goods we've built up. We've demonstrated to the world that the digital public infrastructure, all the innovations have come from an emerging market and not from an advanced market, as distinct from the big tech innovation model of US and the GDPR market of the Europe, where privacy was there, but innovation was killed. But India has combined innovation with privacy, and therefore, huge amount of, we are far more digitally advanced. We do 7x of digital payment of what United States, Europe, and Canada do together. We do 3x of what China does in digital payments. It's also important to point out that we've done some remarkable work on infrastructure. We've provided piped water connection to 81 million houses. 81 million houses under the Jal Jeevan mission, which is like providing water connection to every single citizen of Brazil. We provided 30 million houses under the Awas Yojana, which is like providing house to the entire population of Australia. Entire population of Australia. And we've done 50,000 kilometers of roads, which is like building roads all through the European Union. Now, these are very major achievements in the last 7 to 8 years of this government, which need to be highlighted and pointed out to the world that there has been a radical transformation in terms of housing, in terms of electricity, in terms of providing LED bulbs, in terms of a huge transformation that has taken place. So I'm a great believer that the story of India has just begun. It is not just the decade of this is not just the decade of India, but this is going to be India's century in the coming years.
So, this is exactly what I was alluding to. People buy benefits. Brands are all about benefits. You don't buy Colgate, you buy the whitest teeth. You don't buy Surf, you buy the whitest wash. What you're saying has a duality in terms of the narrative. All the things that you talked about have actually transformed India and are transformational for the world to see about India. My personal view is that this is the narrative that now needs to be played out. We need to somehow wrap this in quasi-emotional speak. Like, for instance, what you just said about Brazil, providing drinking water to every citizen of Brazil. The giganticism of the task that this government has undertaken and achieved is not known. Because our media, other than Republic, of course, is so busy worrying about, contentious issues on a daily basis. I don't blame them. But some of these stories have not found their way either in the Indian narrative within India or in the narrative about India in the West. How do you believe this is going to change? Because I know you've done remarkable work with Incredible India, where you got partners. I remember many, many years ago doing this phrase where Amitabh was also there. I wrote something called India Everywhere for Davos. If you remember, at that time we took buses, we took hoardings, we took everything to let the world know. Now today you're going to have 20 of the world's leading, most powerful leaders coming into India. What's that narrative going to play out before and after that?
So Suhel, 2 points on that. One is that you will have all the top leaders, the finance ministers, the external affairs ministers, the central bank governors, the Sherpas, everyone in India. It's very important to put out data points. Talking in generalities doesn't help. Quite often we talk in generalities. We should actually put out with clear facts and figures the transformation that has taken place. Secondly, we must get, like I ran a program called the Aspirational Districts of India, which covered the most backward, 115 of the most backward districts of India. In 3.5 years' time, we transformed them simply because of data points. We got real-time data, we put the ranking in public domain, the districts competed, and all the aspirational districts, simply because of data and real-time data and competition, transformed themselves. Because we were naming and shaming them on outcome basis. This government has moved away from physical and financial achievement, and I've been 42 years in government, so I've worked with different governments. The earlier governments used to work on physical and financial achievement. This government has moved to outcomes and outputs. And therefore, these outcomes were put out in public domain, and we were naming and shaming the collectors, and because it was naming and shaming, and public data was being put out in public domain, they were able to then compete and transform 22% of India's population at the grassroots level. There are many such transformational stories. For instance, we do the Ayushman Bharat scheme. We are covering 500 million Indians digitally for health insurance. 500 million Indians means more than the population of USA and Europe put together. Now, that is the transformation. You can be in Bihar, moving to Tamil Nadu, you'll carry your health insurance with you. Now, this is transformational. You've heard about the Obama healthcare and how it failed. But India has done this successfully, digitally. We did the CoWIN, all digitally linked to your passport. And therefore, these are the stories of transformation which must be put out in public domain with data points. And there are many, for instance, the aspirational districts, the UNDP said it's a model which needs to be replicated in all over Latin America and all over Africa to transform these countries. And that is what needs to be talked about.
So it's interesting that you mention and you do talk about 42 years in government. When I look back, and this is not because this government is in power and we have to be nice to them. We don't have to be nice to anyone because they all tax you equally. But when you look at this government, and when I say this government, the first term and now, the single difference is that things are happening. People are working, but most importantly, there's accountability. What do you think has changed? Has there been more citizenry pressure? Because of the media, is there greater awareness? Is there greater accountability? Is there greater involvement? When you look back at a very good career that you've had as a bureaucrat, what do you think has changed? Because obviously the politician has changed, the citizen has changed, and hopefully the bureaucrat has changed.
Amity has been ranked India's #1 private university for the 10th year by India Today, a testimony to Amity's world-class education whilst imbibing values and sanskars in students.
News media is evolving. The mediums are expanding. The opportunities are plenty. It is time to put the focus on what is the future of news media. India's biggest news federation brings you India's biggest news media conclave.
Addressing the opening session of the once in 5-year Communist Party Congress in Beijing, Chinese President Xi Jinping said China has achieved comprehensive control over Hong Kong. Xi also made China's stand clear on Taiwan, saying China has also waged a major struggle against Taiwan's separatism and is determined and able to oppose territorial integrity.
In response to separatist activities aimed at Taiwan independence and gross provocations of external interference in Taiwan affairs, we have resolutely fought against separatism and counter-interference, demonstrating our resolve and ability to safeguard China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and to oppose Taiwan independence.
Xi received a thunderous applause from around 2,300 delegates who had gathered at Beijing's Great Hall of the People for the event. Bureau Report, Republic TV.
1 billion homes, A million stories. India's biggest news media conclave.
And moving on now to other news stories. During her US visit, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman addressed the situation of the sharp slide of the Indian rupee against the dollar as a result of rising geopolitical tensions. The Union Minister said that the Indian rupee has done much better than many other currencies.
Not rupee sliding, and look at it as dollar strengthening incessantly. So obviously all other currencies are performing against a strengthening dollar. And I'm not talking technicalities, but it is a matter of fact that India's rupee
ask you, and you can please be honest on this one. Who and what are the lag points? What are the things that are drawing us back from achieving this? Politics apart, and political compulsions apart, what do you think are the 3-4 things that are actually holding us back from achieving this? And be as brutally honest as you want to be.
Yeah, so first and foremost, growth of a country is dependent on its states. And therefore, it's very important that states must become the key drivers of growth. States need to accelerate the pace of growth, much like what Gujarat did. For 10 years in a row, it grew at about 11% plus. You need 10 Indian states to be growing at 10% plus. That's critical to my mind. That's critical, 10 Indian states. Secondly, you need, in the central and the eastern part of India, you need states to talk a different language, move away from agriculture. It's important because in India, 18% of your agriculture with 43% of your population in agriculture, low productivity jobs. These, without smart urbanization, it'll be impossible to grow rapidly. And I'm saying this because look at Uttar Pradesh. Gautam Budh Nagar, which is Noida and Greater Noida, is GDP of one district is 10x of what the second district Kanpur does. 10x of Kanpur. The GDP of Mumbai alone, one city, is more than the GDP of Uttar Pradesh. And therefore, smart urbanization backed by good manufacturing is the response to this. Without this, you need all these states, Uttar Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar, all of them to drive the growth momentum. And that will create the jobs for you.
But you see, the counter argument of this is always that the states, the places you mentioned, including Noida, have had a historical legacy. Mumbai has always been the commercial capital. The trick is to make semi-urban centers smart cities or urban-centric or urban-focused, as you mentioned. We are not focusing as much on the really small cities. I've worked across sectors. The Coimbatores of the world, the Ludhianas, have always generated a huge amount of revenue. But we need to spread that goodness. The antecedents, for those of you who are from Bengal, the antecedents of the Naxalite movement began because there was migration from rural to urban because of a paucity of jobs. So one point is obviously states. But Amitabh, states will always have political compulsions. Some people, and it's really tragic, I don't want to mention names, some states, at the cost of their own citizens, are opposing goodness for just petty partisan political reasons. That's not going to change in a hurry.
So the point about that is that good economic growth and good governance must become good politics.
Absolutely. And I think, to be fair to Narendra Modi and to be fair to a lot of state chief ministers, they are recognizing today that ultimately people want food on the table, a dignity of livelihood, and something to be aspirational about. I want to wind down and ask you, I think we have 5 more minutes. to ask you the last question. After G20 is over, and I know we will have a stunning presidency, because everything will hopefully fall in place. I can see the infrastructural part develop. I can see the processes develop. The digitization of India has been more than remarkable. When you look back at the next 2-3 years, because 5 years is too long a horizon, what's the India you dream of? Because you've been part of that incredible India, no pun intended. You've been part of that incredible India's journey. So when you actually demit office at the end of your presidency and move into yet another government appointment, which I'm sure will come your way because you've been good at it, where do you see India in the next 2-3 years?
So Suhel, first of all, it's important for every Indian to look at a much longer perspective rather than just 2 to 3 years. And it's important, I would say 3 decades. Prime Minister has defined it as 2047. India needs to do a 9 to 10% rate of growth year after year, year after year, year after year. This would require, much like what Prime Minister has aimed at, a huge amount of structural reforms on a constant basis. It would require massive productivity enhancement. It would require a huge focus on massive use of going digital and going green. And it would require a huge focus on getting into sunrise areas of growth. It's important to understand this because India has been focusing on textiles, food processing, which are important from a job perspective. But we must understand that the sale of mobiles is more than the sale of automobiles today. So you have to get into renewable, you have to get into battery storage, you have to get into electric mobility, you have to make the quantum leap forward in all these artificial intelligence and machine learning. And these are the areas which will spur your growth rate to high levels and create completely new jobs, because I think we must understand one thing, that India will be accounting for 25 to 30% of the skilled manpower of the world by 2047. And therefore, we require new skills and completely new skills which will take on the rest of the world. This is our opportunity to capture the world and penetrate the world.
I would just add one thing to that. Before you commence on Atma Nirbharta, there has to be Atma Vishwas. And today what we are seeing is a greater quotient of Atma Vishwas. The average Indian is more confident, he's more capable. Hopefully, the impoverishment of opportunities will diminish. I generally believe every country has poverty. Where we have suffered is we've denied equal opportunity to a large mass of people, which, as you rightly said, is disappearing. You know, when I look at India from a business perspective, from a perspective of dealing with so many businesses both here and overseas, I just don't see a great country. I see a great people. I see a people who are not only going to be more confident, they're going to be more concerned, they're going to be more compassionate, they're going to be more global. Because in addition to our economic prowess comes our civilizational legacy. When you combine civilization with commerce, it's a win-win. That's the India I see. And I hope that every one of us sees it with the same thought, maybe not in the same contours. And I generally believe, Amitabh, people like you, people like the Prime Minister, people who serve at the district level, people who give up their tomorrows so that our todays look good, our caregivers, our lifesavers, these are the people who make us who we are. The person who comes and fixes things at your house so that your technology is never disabled. People in the media who inform you so that you can make an informed choice. And for that, India, let's all pray and hope. And thank you, Amitabh. We wish you the very best during the next 1 year and even more for the rest of your career and the rest of your life. Thank you so much.
Amity has been ranked India's #1 private university for the 10th year by India Today, a testimony to Amity's world-class education whilst imbibing values and sanskars in students.
Addressing the opening session of the once in 5-year Communist Party Congress in Beijing, Chinese President Xi Jinping said China has achieved comprehensive control over Hong Kong. Xi also made China's stand clear on Taiwan, saying China has also waged a major struggle against Taiwan's separatism and is determined and able to oppose territorial integrity.
In response to separatist activities aimed at Taiwan independence and gross provocations of external interference in Taiwan affairs, we have resolutely fought against separatism and counter-interference, demonstrating our resolve and ability to safeguard China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and to oppose Taiwan independence.
Xi received a thunderous applause from around 2,300 delegates who had gathered at Beijing's Great Hall of the People for the event. Bureau Report, Republic TV.
A billion homes, a million stories. India's biggest news media conclave.
And moving on now to other news stories. During her US visit, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman addressed the situation of the sharp slide of the Indian rupee against the dollar as a result of rising geopolitical tensions. The Union Minister said that the Indian rupee has done much better than many other currencies.
Not rupee sliding, and look at it as dollar strengthening. Dollar strengthening incessantly. So obviously all other currencies are performing against a strengthening dollar. And I'm not talking technicalities, but it is a matter of fact that India's rupee probably has withstood this dollar, rates going up, the exchange rate.
A fire broke out in a 24-storied building in Istanbul's Kadıköy district. As per sources, no casualties have been reported yet. The cause of the
CBI summons accused number 1 in Liquorgate asked to appear at 11 a.m. on Monday. That's for Manish Sisodia. The agency all set to grill Sisodia, but Kejriwal continues to back his deputy, compares him with Bhagat Singh.
एमएलए जेल जाके आए हैं और अब बेल पर हैं। जेल और बेल के बीच में घूमने वाले एमएलए वो आज आम आदमी पार्टी के एमएलए हैं। ये हम
BJP President JP Nadda targets AAP on corruption, calls Kejriwal government a government of scams, says AAP has broken Congress's corruption record. Big disclosure in interim report of madrasas survey by the UP government. More than 6,500 unrecognized madrasas found. China reiterates stand on Taiwan, says won't renounce the right to use force over Taiwan. Very good evening, friends. This Sunday evening, an important geopolitical event is panning out across the Himalayas in Beijing, with the 20th session of the National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party starting today. While this would go on for the next 7 days and see Xi Jinping get the expected third term as the boss of the party and hence President of China early next year. His comments during the plenary have set the agenda for the world geostrategic community to ponder on. Jinping has underscored the use of force as a tool to deal with any dissent from Taiwan. Should India be concerned? And if yes, how much? Let's look at this report and then come back to discuss.
All eyes were on Xi Jinping's address at the 20th National Congress in Beijing, and his statement on Taiwan has raised concern across the globe.
解决台湾问题是中国人自己的事，要由中国人来决定。我们坚持以最大诚意，尽最大努力，争取和平统一的前景，但绝不承诺放弃使用武力，保留采取一切必要措施的选项。
In the same breath, Xi had also made a Hong Kong comparison to Taiwan.
面对香港局势动荡变化，我们依照宪法和基本法，有效实施对特别行政区的全面管制权，落实爱国者治港原则，香港局势实现由乱到治的重大转折。
This statement is seen as a warning to the United States of America, especially in the light of US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in August this year.
坚定不移贯彻一国两制、港人治港、澳人治澳、高度自治的方针，坚持依法治港治澳，落实中央全面管制权，落实爱国者治港、爱国者治澳原则。
Comparison would have been puerile, but for the manner in which China has stamped out dissent and clamped down on protests in Hong Kong over the last couple of years. What Jinping perhaps meant was that, like in the case of Hong Kong, so in the case of Taiwan, the Chinese state would deal with the kind of brutality it has so perfected.
Shortly after Xi Jinping's statement, Taiwan responded by saying that it will never compromise on the values of sovereignty, democracy, and freedom. Over the last 8 months, China has indicated at using force to capture Taiwan, with military drills and back-to-back warnings. And with Xi Jinping's latest statement at the 20th National Congress, where he is likely to get the third term, the world is closely watching the dragon's move. Bureau Report, Republic TV.
All right, lots of thoughts on our minds. Would China get more aggressive post the National Congress? Are we going to see even more of wolf warrior diplomacy? And joining me to discuss this this evening, Professor Shrikant Kondapalli. He joins me live from Delhi, writer and professor of Chinese Studies at the JNU. Sushant Sareen, senior fellow from the ORF, live from Delhi. Always a pleasure engaging with him. And Dr. Roger Liu, head of the Social Sciences Department at Flame University in Pune. He's live from Pune, but of course with tremendous amount of Taiwan background. If I could begin with you, Professor Liu, should Taiwan really buy peace, the kind of threat Xi Jinping has given today?
Thank you for having me here. I would like to say that, well, if you have done some textual analysis comparing what he has said in the previous time, actually, this has not changed very much. So we should not focus on the words itself. But what we are seeing is that China has actually prepared for some kind of military invasions in the past few years, and that has raised the brows of other powers in this region, including Taiwan itself. So, well, our guess is that, well, they will still keep using tactics like United Front by getting the support from the military, the business people inside of the island to push for the peaceful reunification. But at the same time, they are preparing themselves now militarily, completely. So, well, I just returned from Taiwan a week ago. And I had a meeting with some leaders, academic leaders and policy makers in this region. And a lot of them have prepared to do that. They have recognized that a military threat is very imminent, and in the future, especially between 2024 to 2027, this is the between the 3 years, it's very likely that we will see this kind of things happening. So I think this is a real threat that not only Taiwan, Japan, the United States, but India also need to take a heed of.
Yeah. All right. Sushant, Professor Liu believes that the threat is real and military action could be imminent. How soon you think China could be invading Taiwan? And in that case, what should be India's position?
Look, I agree with what the professor is saying, that the threat is imminent. It has always been there. I think a lot will depend upon the Chinese capability and the blowback that will come if the Chinese were to take or indulge in such an adventurism. I think a lot will depend on that. It will depend on how well prepared the Taiwanese are to, fend off the first initial attack, how much the rest of the world is going to be standing on Taiwan's back. And then, of course, what are going to be the repercussions for not just China, but also the rest of the world, because whether the Chinese like it or not, Taiwan is a technological powerhouse. A lot of international industry depends upon Taiwan. And in fact, in some ways, if the Chinese were to take any action in Taiwan, its repercussions would be found around the world. So I think all of those factors will weigh with the Chinese leadership. My own sense is, and I'm daring to speak in front of Professor Kondapalli, who is somebody we learn from, whose writings. But my own sense is that while Xi Jinping will get his third term, I think he's reached the heights of his power, and from here it's only going to be he's going to start losing power. Now how that works out, we'll have to see.
Yeah. So Sushant, I'll go to Professor Kondapalli on that note. Professor, Sushant says that Xi Jinping might be at the pinnacle of his power and might start losing power now. But, he's 69 years old. He has been president for 10 years already. And the manner in which he has carried out the purges in the PLA, in the Communist Party, across the hierarchy, along the verticals, you think he might not be peaking as yet. And Taiwan sort of has been the dream for Xi Jinping for last some years, and that he would make sure that before he actually peaks in his power, he takes Taiwan.
Well, in the previous Congress, 19-party Congress, Xi Jinping had preponed the 2049 estimates of creating a socialist modernized society till 2035. And that led to speculation that he will be around till 2030. So there is also that possibility that he may, with this third term, possibly he would look for a life term for the General Secretary position. The President position has been extended in March 2018. And so on this issue of whether Xi Jinping will get an extension or not is relative power balance within the Communist Party. On the issue of Taiwan, in the 19-party Congress, there was a mention of 6 no's. And in the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China last July, Xi Jinping used the words that he will break the heads of anyone who is promoting Taiwan independence. So very harsh words here on Taiwan. And we have seen also during the Nancy Pelosi's visit and after the PLA exercises in 6 areas close to Taiwan. So this is one which Communist Party leaders keep mentioning. Jiang Zemin mentioned this during the 2004 white paper issued in that time. he, for instance, said, we will not allow the Taiwan drift towards independence sine die. And Hu Jintao's term also had similar. When we go back to Mao Zedong waged wars on Chinman, on Tumshan Islands, on various others. So this has been a tradition within the Communist Party to, pitch the high decibels on Taiwan. Technically, they have this problem that in 1894, when the Japanese defeated China, Li Hongzhang gave up Korean Peninsula and Taiwan to Japan. And so there is this stigma for the Communist Party leaders that they should not be called as a next Li Hongzhang for giving up Taiwan. So this is a kind of historical stigma that is attached to the policies of China on Taiwan. Of course, for the most part, Taiwan has been independent. They have their own president, they have their own armed forces, they have their own economy. They're a member of the WTO, they're a member of so many other international organizations. So they have their own.
I'm interrupting you, but we have to also. I'm really sorry I'm interrupting you, sir, but because we are short of time, we have about 15-20 minutes. We have to understand what are the implications going to be for rest of the world, particularly for India. Sushant Sareen, if I could come back to you. Taiwan, whatever China is doing is a stated policy. But how would India need to really recalibrate? Professor Liu is saying that the war is imminent, we are preparing, we would seek support from the world. In that case, what should be India's position?
Look, I don't speak for the government like none of us do out here. But I'm very clear that the kind of aggressiveness...
As a strategic affairs expert, Sushant.
Yeah, purely as that, I'm very clear in my mind that the kind of aggression that the Chinese are showing towards smaller neighbors, forget Taiwan, forget India, they're even doing it with Bhutan, and I think you have to confront the bully. I've sensed a certain amount of diffidence on India's part to get into some kind of military arrangements, military, alliances. But maybe that's the road forward, because given the kind of power that the Chinese are accumulating, it becomes very difficult for a single country to take on the Chinese. And maybe a concert of democracies in the region might be better placed to confront the Chinese, at least keep them at bay. Now, I believe that if the Chinese are not doing anything in Taiwan, apart from, flexing their muscle, it is because of a lack of capability and because they fear the repercussions and consequences. But the day those considerations are not going to be there, you will see the Chinese attack the Taiwanese. The same is going to happen with us. So yes, we have to prepare ourselves, we have to prepare our own military muscle, but we also have to tie up with other nations in the world to try and keep the Chinese at bay, contain the Chinese.
Yeah, Professor Kondapalli, I'll come back to you quickly for your another minute of comments. Sushant Sareen says that we have to confront the bully, we have to get in touch with others and coordinate our actions. But I have seen, Professor Kondapalli, two things. One, that India, at least in the last decade, has not mentioned one nation, two systems principle which the Chinese really want us to speak and be vocal about. We have not done that. We have not obliged the Chinese. Also, of late, I am seeing in the last 6 months, for whatever I can, monitor the Chinese media, they are really soft on India. Last 6 months. Yesterday, Global Times had an edit praising Dr. S. Jaishankar. What's happening on that front? How do we confront a bully who's sort of trying to soften its position vis-a-vis us?
Well, in the speech by Xi Jinping, 73 times the word safety, security has been mentioned, which indicates for the first time, and it is reported that a separate section on national security will be mentioned for the first time in a work report by the General Secretary. This suggests, of course, in conjunction with the emphasis on PLA modernization, this suggests to the getting back to the security state syndrome within China, number one. Number two, there is also the Chang Haching, who participated in Galwan, there are a lot of videos that are being circulated in the mainstream media within China that suggests that they are not going to give up. And in fact, Xi Jinping's speech also included core interests that he is not going to give up. So I do not think there is any change in Global Times or the Communist Party's view on Galwan. And Global Times is misleading because when they are facing flack from the Americans on the semiconductor industry and on the tariff wars, and of course during the Ukrainian conflict, when they're facing the flack from the Americans, they approach India on the multipolarity debate in BRICS, SEO, and other things. So this is a kind of lollipop that the Global Times gives you. Don't fall prey to that. Focus on whether they have removed the troops from all friction points in Galwan. That's a basic point. Whether they are praising Dr. Jaishankar or not is immaterial. But what is important is, as Raksha Mantri, the Defense Minister, said in February last year, they have to vacate in all friction points, period.
Yes. Very well said, sir. This is classic Chinese deception because they obviously don't want two-front, wars happening or two-front aggression happening, I believe. Last word to Professor Liu. Professor Liu, you said that, you would want support from rest of the world. What kind of support you are expecting? The Americans are obviously giving you weapons, of course, for money. But what else, what other kind of support are you expecting from the rest of the world, particularly India?
Especially, we hope that all the democracies should unify to work together to recognize the real threat that China has been imposing to us. All together, we have to form our own united front. Well, like Professor Kondapati has been saying, that what China has been doing is to form a united front along with India on different issues. But now, as democracies, we should recognize that we are together. And what India can do is that I think India can express its interest in this region, not only South China Sea, but also India should extend its concerns and interest to the Taiwan Strait. So when something happens, India should step in and either use military or diplomatic supports to extend its power to this region, because India have to understand, if Taiwan was attacked, next will be India, because the Chinese is trying to show this to India that you cannot fight us, because if we can take Taiwan, we can also do the same thing to you. So I think India should recognize the strategic importance of the Taiwan Strait.
All right, Professor. According to Professor Liu, if Taiwan is now, India could be next. Of course, everyone is watching. I have only this much time, unfortunately, this Sunday evening. Thank you so much, Professor Kondapalli, Sushant Sarin, and Professor Liu for joining us in this broadcast. Xi Jinping's use of force threat against Taiwan would echo with the global strategic community for some time. This is not the first time he has said this, but the occasion, the 20th National Congress, in which Jinping is renewing and rejuvenating his leadership, means the threat could be real. India, like the rest of the world, needs to recalibrate dealing with the bull in the China shop, as we could be next in the Thucydides trap. We would closely watch the Beijing developments over the next week and keep you abreast. Keep watching. Now over to a breaking news development coming in.
A billion homes, a million stories. India's biggest news media conclave.
And moving on now to other news stories. During her US visit, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman addressed the situation of the sharp slide of the Indian rupee against the dollar as a result of rising geopolitical tensions. The Union Minister said that the Indian rupee has done much better than many other currencies.
Not rupee sliding, and look at it as dollar strengthening. Dollar strengthening incessantly. So obviously all other currencies are performing against a strengthening dollar. And I'm not talking technicalities, but it is a matter of fact that India's rupee probably has withstood this dollar, rates going up, the exchange rate.
A fire broke out in a 24-storied building in Istanbul's Kadıköy district. As per sources, no casualties have been reported yet. The cause of the blaze still remains unknown.
The faces that matter. The most compelling conversations. The issues never discussed before. India's biggest news media conclave.
Two volunteer soldiers allegedly opened fire at a military firing range near Ukraine. 11 people killed, 15 wounded before the soldiers were shot down. The volunteers are said to be from an unnamed ex-Soviet nation. US President Joe Biden calls British Prime Minister Liz Truss' abandoned tax cut plan a mistake. Expresses his worries over the prevailing situation, stating that other nations' fiscal policies may hurt the US amid worldwide